Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into something pretty thought-provoking today.
Always up for a good deep dive.
Awesome. So we're going to be exploring this idea that compassion, specifically the kind we show towards those experiencing hunger, could actually be like the key to reaching a higher state of being.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting concept.
Right. And we're going to be using this text called Soul Compassion by the spiritual leader Chithambaram Ramalingaswamy as our guide.
I'm not super familiar with that one, to be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff. He basically lays out this idea that compassion, particularly when it comes to feeding the hungry, isn't just like a nice thing to do, but a legitimate spiritual practice.
Okay, I'm intrigued already. So where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, right off the bat, Ramalingaswamy talks about these two types of bliss. He says there's the kind of, everyday happiness you get from helping someone out, like giving them shelter or clothing when they need it.
Yeah, I get that. The kind of warm, fuzzy feeling you get from doing a good deed.
Exactly. But then he introduces this other kind of bliss, a superior divine bliss, which is directly connected to easing the suffering of hunger. It's like a whole other level, you know?
So it's not just about any act of compassion, but specifically about addressing hunger.
It seems that way, yeah. And he really emphasizes the joy that both the giver and the receiver experience in these acts, especially when it comes to meeting basic needs like food. He uses this phrase, bliss that manifests on the faces, when he talks about it.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
You can almost feel the energy of that exchange just from his words.
Absolutely. And he doesn't shy away from powerful imagery, especially when describing the power of hunger itself. He uses these crazy examples, emperors, warriors, you name it, even these super disciplined sages and yogis, all totally undone by their need to eat.
Oh, wow. That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Even those with incredible willpower are no match for the need to eat.
Right, and the way he describes it, it's almost like he's saying no one, absolutely no one, is immune to this primal need.
It's a pretty powerful way to highlight just how universal hunger really is. Regardless of your status or your willpower, everyone has to eat.
I think he's definitely making a point there. And, he even writes in Soul Compassion, hunger is the fire that burns within, consuming all thoughts and desires until it is quenched.
That's intense. He's definitely not sugarcoating the experience.
Nope, not at all. But by emphasizing how intense that suffering is, he sets up his whole argument about the incredible power that comes with alleviating it.
It's like he's saying, if you want to experience true compassion, if you want to really connect with that divine bliss he's talking about, you need to understand the depths of this suffering first.
Right. And he doesn't just talk about it in a vague way either. He gets into some pretty specific, kind of intense descriptions of what happens to the body and mind when someone is starving.
Oh, yeah. Like what kind of stuff?
He talks about bodily function shutting down, your senses getting all messed up, even your mind losing its clarity. It's honestly a bit unsettling to read, to be honest.
Yeah, that's not exactly light reading, but I guess it makes sense. You can't really talk about the power of compassion without acknowledging the reality of the suffering you're trying to alleviate.
Exactly. And I think that's where some of those really vivid descriptions come in. It's like he's forcing you to confront the harsh reality of hunger, not just think about it as some abstract concept, but really grasp what it does to a person.
There's a passage where he compares hunger to a fire. He says, as a raging fire consumes a forest, so does hunger consume the body, leaving behind only ashes of what once was.
Whoa, okay. That paints a very clear picture.
Yeah. He's definitely trying to evoke some deep empathy in the reader, make you feel that visceral discomfort. I think he wants us to understand just how powerful compassion can be, because we truly grasp the depth of the suffering it addresses.
I think you're right on the money with that. And what's interesting? After all those descriptions of suffering, he flips the script and talks about this incredible flourishing that happens when hunger is satisfied.
Oh, that's interesting. How does he describe it? Like simply feeling full?
It's more than that. He talks about this feeling of the body and mind being cooled and nourished, and there's this unique joy that's produced. It's like something deeper is awakened when you satisfy that primal need.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about the physical act of eating, but about something deeper being nourished.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think about how he brings in the concept of prana, that vital life force from Eastern traditions. He's saying that feeding someone isn't just giving them calories, it's nourishing this vital energy, which leads to a more, like a holistic sense of well-being.
Okay, so by feeding someone, you're not just filling their stomach, but you're actually nourishing this prana, this life force energy, which leads to a deeper, more spiritual sense of well-being.
That's exactly what he seems to be saying. And here's where things get even more interesting. He goes on to say, and this is a direct quote, "Hunger is a tool provided by God to allow compassion to manifest and God's grace to be obtained."
Whoa, hold on, that's a pretty heavy statement. Is he suggesting that hunger is somehow necessary for spiritual growth? Like it's part of some divine plan?
Yeah, that's a really big question. And to be honest, the text doesn't give us a clear-cut answer. But it definitely makes you think, right? Like, if hunger is this divinely ordained tool, how are we supposed to approach it? Do we just accept it passively? Or is there something we're supposed to do about it?
That's a really good question.
It makes you wonder if there's some kind of potential hidden within the experience of suffering, Like, maybe the point is to see just how deep the suffering can go and then imagine the incredible heights of compassion and grace that could emerge from it.
Yeah, it's like he's challenging us to see hunger not just as a problem to be solved, but as an opportunity for growth and connection. Maybe even a doorway to something bigger than ourselves. And it's not just about the physical need for food either. Ramalingaswamy goes on to talk about how hunger actually impacts a person's spirit.
Yeah, there's a whole section where he talks about all the inner turmoil that comes with being hungry. Like the sorrow and anxiety, even despair. He really paints this picture of mental anguish.
It's almost like their spirit is starving alongside their body.
That's a really good way to put it. And Ramalingaswamy really highlights these feelings of helplessness and shame that can come up when you're struggling with hunger. It's like this feeling of hopelessness that can just take over.
It makes you realize that feeding someone isn't just about providing those calories. It's about offering them a sense of hope.
And dignity.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Like you're reminding them that they matter, that they're not forgotten, and they deserve to be cared for.
It's like you're throwing them a lifeline, right? Giving them a glimmer of hope when they might be surrounded by darkness.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it highlights just how transformative compassion can be. It goes way beyond just charity. It's about recognizing that shared humanity and extending kindness without judgment.
And that idea of universal compassion is something he emphasizes throughout the text. Remember that part where he talks about how God is present in all beings?
Oh yeah, and he says that when those beings are hungry, it's our duty to satisfy them.
Exactly. And not just with any food, but with sattvic food. Food that's pure and nourishing for the body and mind. It's like he's saying that everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, deserves to be treated with that same level of care and respect.
That everyone is worthy of kindness.
Absolutely. But it's not like Ramalingaswamy sugarcoats things either. He acknowledges that there are going to be challenges and obstacles on this path of compassion.
Oh yeah, definitely. He talks about how our loved ones might even try to dissuade us from helping others.
Yeah, and it's not always out of malice, right? Sometimes it comes from a place of fear or just not understanding why we feel so compelled to help.
It's true. He actually brings up a really interesting point. He even suggests that God might hinder a devotee's efforts to feed the hungry.
Wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Why would anyone, especially a divine being, want to prevent an act of compassion?
I know. It's a weird passage for sure. But maybe it's like a metaphor for the internal struggles we all face.
Like the doubts and fears that hold us back from acting on our good intentions?
Maybe. Or maybe he's trying to tell us that those fears and doubts, even when they feel overwhelming, shouldn't stop us from doing what we know is right.
So it's like a test of our commitment to compassion.
Exactly. Like, are you willing to push past those internal barriers, even if it means going against the grain, even if you face resistance from those around you?
He's definitely challenging us to dig deep and align our actions with our values, even when it's difficult.
And remember, he also points out that ultimately, the consequences of our actions, good or bad, fall on us.
It's a reminder that we have to take responsibility for our choices, regardless of outside influences.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to really tune into our conscience and follow that inner guidance. And, for those who do, he paints such a beautiful picture of what that kind of compassionate life can look like.
Oh, yeah. He calls those who feed the hungry yogis and true wise men.
It's like he's saying that true wisdom isn't just about knowledge or spiritual practices, but about putting compassion into action.
It's about embodying those virtues in your daily life.
Exactly. And he describes them as having this inner purity and this deep sense of joy that comes from seeing others nourished.
And he uses that vivid imagery again, talking about how their souls are filled with God's presence and their bodies flourish with the coolness and their faces just radiate with the bliss of satisfaction.
It's a powerful image of what it means to be truly aligned with compassion, both inwardly and outwardly.
And I love how he ties all of this back to feeding the hungry, you know? He talks about extinguishing the fire of hunger and preventing the poisonous wind of hunger from blowing out the lamp of knowledge.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. It's like by feeding the hungry, we're rekindling their inner flame.
Yeah, and we're protecting that spark of knowledge and wisdom within them. It's almost like we're helping them reclaim their potential.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it all ties back to his idea that true compassion goes beyond just meeting someone's immediate needs. It's about empowering them to break free from suffering.
Right. Remember how he encourages those who might have limited resources to still prioritize feeding the hungry, even above providing for their own families.
That's a tough one. It seems counterintuitive at first.
It does, but I think he's trying to get at something bigger here, something about collective well-being.
Like, maybe he's suggesting that by creating a more just and compassionate society as a whole, we actually create a more secure environment for everyone, including our own families.
Yeah, it's like he's saying true security comes not from hoarding resources, but from sharing them. It's about making sure everyone has a chance to thrive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our well-being is interconnected. We can't truly flourish if those around us are struggling.
And he doesn't just stalk at individual acts of kindness. He calls for a more radical approach to the issue of hunger.
Like addressing the systemic causes of poverty and inequality.
Yes. He acknowledges that hunger is often a symptom of social injustice and economic disparity, and he urges us to go beyond just charity and work towards creating systems that ensure everyone has access to food, shelter, healthcare, all those basic necessities.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the chance not just to survive, but to truly flourish.
And he even suggests that those who choose to ignore the suffering of others will ultimately face consequences.
Yeah, that part was a bit intense.
It was, but I don't think he meant it as some kind of divine punishment, you know? It's more about understanding that our actions have ripple effects. When we neglect the needs of others, we create a world where everyone suffers.
It's like we're all connected, and our choices impact not just ourselves, but the entire web of life.
Exactly. So it's not about living in fear of consequences, but about understanding the power we have to create a better world through our actions. And Ramalingaswamy believes that compassion is the key to unlocking that potential.
It's like an investment in a more just and beautiful future for all of us.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about physical acts of service either. He talks about compassion as a spiritual practice.
Cultivating empathy and a sense of connection.
Yes. And he even suggests that people who dedicate themselves to practices like yoga, meditation, or penance won't achieve true liberation unless they also practice compassion towards those who are hungry.
It's about integrating those values into every aspect of our lives, not just our spiritual practices.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, why is he so focused on compassion towards the hungry specifically?
Well, maybe it's because it's such a direct and tangible way to alleviate suffering. Like you can see the immediate impact of your actions.
And it's not just about giving someone a handout, it's about empowering them.
Right.
Giving them the resources they need to break free from that cycle of poverty.
Yeah. He talks about providing education and training so people can develop their skills and contribute to society.
And he even suggests that by investing in the empowerment of the hungry, we actually create a more prosperous and harmonious society for everyone.
It's like everyone benefits when we lift each other up.
Exactly. And it all comes back to that idea of interconnectedness, right? We can't truly flourish if those around us are struggling.
I love how he weaves all these ideas together, this beautiful tapestry of compassion and liberation. But he doesn't just leave us with lofty ideals, you know.
Oh yeah, he gets super practical too. Like, remember when he talks about how even during special occasions and celebrations, we should always remember to set aside a portion of our resources for feeding the hungry.
That's right. It's like he's saying compassion shouldn't be limited to specific times or situations. It's a way of life.
It's about finding ways to be inclusive and share our abundance with those in need.
And he believes that doing so actually enhances our own joy and makes the experience more meaningful for everyone.
So it's not about sacrificing our happiness, it's about expanding it.
Exactly. And it all comes back to his belief that compassion is a source of profound joy and fulfillment.
And he doesn't just talk about providing food, he talks about offering hope and dignity to those who are struggling.
He reminds us that hunger can bring up so much shame and despair. And by feeding someone, we're not just nourishing their body, but we're also validating their worth as a human being.
We're saying, you matter, you deserve care and respect.
And that simple act can be incredibly powerful. It can really transform someone's experience.
It's about creating a space where people feel seen and valued, not just as recipients of charity, but as individuals deserving of love and respect.
And, I think that's what makes Ramalingaswamy's work so powerful. It's not just about changing the lives of those we help, but also about transforming ourselves in the process.
By opening our hearts to compassion, we become more connected, more empathetic, more understanding.
And ultimately, that's what leads to true liberation, both for ourselves and for the world around us.
What an amazing journey we've been on. I'm curious, as we wrap up our deep dive into soul compassion, what stands out to you the most? What insights will you carry with you from this exploration?
I think what really resonates with me is how Ramalingaswamy seamlessly blends the practical with the spiritual. He doesn't shy away from the challenges of putting compassion into action. He even gives really specific advice on how to do it. But he always brings it back to this idea that compassion is ultimately a pathway to something much greater, a way to connect with the divine and experience true fulfillment.
It's like he takes something we might think of as ordinary, just feeding someone who's hungry, and he shows us how extraordinary it can actually be. It's like he's saying, look, this simple act has the power to transform lives, to build communities, even to shape our own spiritual journey.
And what's so cool is that he doesn't just stop at the philosophy. He actually gives us a roadmap for putting it into action.
Right. He gives all this practical advice, especially for those he calls householders, on how to make feeding the hungry a priority.
Yeah, like even above fancy celebrations or personal wants. And it's amazing how he even gives practical tips for managing resources to make it possible.
I know. He even talks about maybe cutting back on family spending or asking wealthier friends or neighbors for help if your own means are limited. It's like he's laying out a social justice plan for his time.
It's super forward thinking.
Yeah.
And there's this one passage, I don't know if you remember it, but he basically says that even if your spouse, your parents, your guru, or even God tries to stop you from feeding the hungry, you should just do it anyway.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was a bit of a head scratcher for me. Why would anyone, especially a divine being, want to stop someone from being compassionate?
It does seem kind of weird, right? But I was thinking about it, and maybe it's a way of highlighting just how deeply ingrained some social norms can be.
You mean like maybe back then there were beliefs or practices that actually discourage certain types of charity?
Possibly. Or maybe he's just using this really strong image, bringing God into it, to emphasize that nothing, absolutely nothing, should stand in the way of feeding the hungry.
So it's like he's giving people permission to break social conventions, even challenge authority, if it means helping someone in need.
I think so, yeah. He's empowering people to follow their conscience, even if it means going against the grain or ruffling some feathers.
That's pretty bold, especially for the time period he was writing in. But it speaks to something universal about compassion, doesn't it? Like it transcends all those boundaries and connects us on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes his work so relevant, even today. He's not just laying down rules. He's calling for a complete shift in how we see the world, a recognition that we're all interconnected and responsible for each other.
Totally. And remember all those benefits he promises for those who practice compassion towards the hungry.
Oh, yeah, he had quite the list. Physical healing, longer life, protection from calamities, even successful businesses. It's a lot to promise.
It is, but he was a poet, a mystic, he used a lot of metaphors and symbolism, so maybe those rewards aren't meant to be taken literally.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Maybe they're more like symbolic representations of the positive changes that happen when we cultivate compassion.
Like the inner peace and strength that comes from living in alignment with your values.
Exactly. And those inner qualities inevitably have an impact on the outer world too. They create a positive ripple effect.
So it's not about doing good deeds to get a reward, but about recognizing that living a compassionate life naturally leads to a more fulfilling and meaningful existence for everyone involved.
I love that. It's like compassion is the seed that grows into a more beautiful world for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, explored some deep concepts. As we wrap up our deep dive into soul compassion, What's sticking with you? What are you going to carry with you from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is how Ramalingaswamy takes something seemingly so simple, the act of feeding someone who's hungry, and reveals its incredible depth and power. It's like a microcosm of our entire spiritual journey, you know?
It's amazing how he connects the everyday act of sharing food with these profound spiritual truths.
It really makes you think about how we can each answer the call to compassion in our own unique ways.
That's a great point. So for all of you listening, we leave you with this question. What small act of compassion will you choose today? Share your thoughts with us on social media, and until next time, keep diving deep.